There we go. Okay, great. And welcome everyone to this session today on the exploring the importance of pride across APAC and EMEA. My name's Alex Hoare. I'm the Global Insights and Content Manager here at LGBT Great. I'm delighted to be joined by Allianz Global Investors today and by Matt Cameron, our Global MD. So yeah, we will get started momentarily, but welcome. I'm very excited for the conversation today. Any update from Marine, Matt?
I think she's hasn't joined yet. I think we can kick off.
We'll kick off. That's fine.
She can join shortly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and I think in a happy Pride. First of all, the session today we're going to run through a few bits and bobs around what Pride means. Look at some of the regionalities of Pride around the world, with a focus on APAC and EMEA, and then we're going to have hopefully a great conversation with some of the panelists who are joining from Allianz Global Investors today. We're going to talk about what Pride means to them, what allyship and what language kind of means, and how do we navigate some of these aspects during Pride. So a few housekeeping things before we start. At the bottom of your screen, you will see the Q&A and the chat function. Please feel free to drop any and all questions to the panelists, either anonymously in the Q&A or openly in the Q&A, or to share your thoughts with everyone else on the call in the chat function. And I know that Matt will be beavering away on the keyboard there to answer questions as they come through via the chat function, and then we may try and take a few questions live as we go. So get involved. I'm sure good morning to many of you, and good afternoon to those of you who are joining from around the world. So please feel free to add all of your thoughts as we go. Just a quick overview of the panelists today, who I'm delighted to be joined by Tim, Zira, and Daniel from Allianz, as well as Matt Cameron, the Global MD of LGBT Great. For those that don't know, LGBT Great is a member organization for financial services firms, where we support companies to improve their LGBT plus DE&I across a series of pillars. So that's insights and content, and data and benchmarking, which is kind of where I lead, as well as visibility programs, role modeling programs, and then a range of events and programs like we're running today. So get involved with LGBT Great if you're interested, and please do feel free to reach out to Matt or myself if you'd like to find out a bit more about the work that we do. In terms of LGBT Great and Allianz, I just sort of wanted to give a bit of a quick overview of some of the work that we've done together, just to give a sense of how does that partnership actually look in practice. So we've done a range of things, including report writing and kind of thought leadership pieces. We look at strategy and goal setting, and how to ensure that LGBT plus and general DE&I issues are tackled effectively through organizational wide strategic goals and objectives that are cascaded, not just at the top, but all the way down as well. And then finally, I would spotlight that Allianz has a really mature diversity, inclusion, and equity program, and that the vision and purpose is very well signaled, well communicated throughout the business. So great. I'm sure if you're interested in finding out more about that, please feel free to reach out to LGBT Great, and we may be able to put you in contact, and I'll have a conversation with you around some of these things if you are interested. That's the kind of short introduction. Matt, I'll come to you for any thoughts maybe on why are we here today, and what are we hoping to get out of the session.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alex, and a very warm welcome to everybody that's dialing in. This follows a second sort of series that we ran. First was yesterday, where we focused on sort of US and EMEA, and today, of course, we're here to talk about LGBT equality and progress within the APAC region. I'm very proud, actually, to be collaborating with Allianz Global Investors. Our partnership now with the organisation is just approaching 2 years. It's been a fantastic journey, seeing how the organisation has really driven its LGBT plus inclusion strategies, and of course across other diversity dimensions as well. And what really stands out to me about AGI is really the commitment, from the top, at CEO level, in terms of making the organisation as supportive and empowering for LGBT people as possible, and the real sort of practical actions as well that are being driven right across the business to create sort of the positive change and to really uplift and inspire LGBT plus people. Now, of course, we're in Global Pride Month at the moment, and this really is a very important time for the LGBT great community and all the other LGBT communities around the world. It's a time to reflect on the progress that we've made. It's a time to sort of really take stock of what we've achieved and celebrate the uniqueness of different diverse identities. But it's also a time as well to really sort of, also take stock on the mountains still to climb. And we know that we've seen an increasing amount of anti-LGBT sentiment building over the last couple of years in the West. We know that APAC, of course, is behind, significantly behind when it comes to LGBT protections and legislation and acceptance of LGBT people as well. So Pride really can be a powerful reminder, influencer and inspiration of change. And we're here today to talk about a number of different themes. And I really hope that you take away a lot from the session, and please do enjoy. And Alex, at that point, I'll pass back over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I can see that Maureen has joined from, I know you're experiencing some tech issues. I'm sure not familiar territory for many. But Maureen, if I could come to you just for some thoughts from your side on, why we're here today and what we're hoping to get out of this.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yes, just about.
Okay, sorry.
Perfect. No worries.
Experiencing some tech issues since this morning, indeed. So, hi everyone, and yes, a warm welcome from my side as well. And thanks to Matt and Alex for those, very nice words about our partnership and what we've been doing. Since many years. It's also a pleasure for us to team up with you and then to benefit from your support. Maybe what I can add to what has been already said is that we really try at Allianz but Investors to make sure that Pride doesn't end at the end of June. So it's very important for us to work on embedding LGBT plus inclusion in everything we do, and making sure that we keep working on this topic all along the year. So we try as much as possible to leverage other key milestones like Coming Out Day, Transgender Day of Visibility, because we believe that those moments are very important to keep the momentum, to continue to raise awareness, to make people aware of misconceptions and stereotypes that are persisting with regards to the LGBT plus community. And we also try to, elevate and make people understand the importance of allyship. That's a topic on which we've been working really hard since few years, and we are strong believers in allyship and role models. And Pride is typically, the moment where we can, work with our role models to inspire, hopefully, other people and to send strong messages. We also try to be as much practical and pragmatic as possible. So, for instance, last year we started to raise awareness and to encourage our colleagues to share their gender pronouns in their email signature. And this in order, again, to show allyship and also understanding of, the multiple gender identities that are existing, and the importance of showing support to non-binary colleagues as well. So in a nutshell, LGBT plus inclusion is a journey. It's not just something that you should work on just in the month of June, and it's not just about talking about just sexuality. It's also about, gender identities. And that's maybe what I would like to say as a final word. I'm super proud that this year, for the first time, we will start raising awareness and start a conversation about trans identity. So we will welcome later in the month a colleague from another Allianz entity who will make testimonial about her own experience with gender transition, and that's going to be for sure a great moment. And I'm really happy that we can start talking about this topic, because LGBT plus inclusion is also about gender identity and fostering inclusion for transgender colleagues. So with this, and without any further ado, I'm giving again the floor to you, Matt. Thank you.
Great, super. Thanks, Maureen. And I'm glad you're able to join. I know you've been having the tech issues this morning. I'm going to hand straight over to you, Alex, actually, to get started on some of the insights and content before we then get into the conversation with our brilliant sort of panelists today. So, Alex, over to you.
Perfect. And thank you, Maureen. That was a perfect segue, really, into kind of what I wanted to do from a kind of introduction point of view today. And I mean, just for everyone joining, what we'll do now is I'll spend 20 minutes or so just talking through some things that I've been seeing around Pride around the world and around LGBT inclusive language, and how we as a global community can explore this, during Pride. But one thing I'll start with is just this. Maureen mentioned gender identity and sexuality, and I wanted to just set a bit of a level playing field for everyone here. And when we think about LGBT plus identities, we can, without being reductive, talk about them in 4 key pillars. And this is sometimes a useful way to think about this conversation, especially if this is something that is new to you, or you don't identify as being part of the LGBT community yourself, but you obviously want to know more. The first is gender identity, which I would say very early on is distinct from biological sex. So you may have heard the terms cisgender and transgender before. So I identify as a cisgender man, which means that my gender identity correlates with the sex that I was assigned at birth. So when I was born, they said it's a boy. Typically that's what how you would hear it, and my gender identity now aligns with that. And so if you're transgender, then your gender identity would not align with the sex that you were assigned at birth, and so you would then transition and be the gender that you are. So gender identity and biological sex, two things just keep in mind as being different. The third and the second and fourth thing, attraction and expression are kind of the ways that you communicate your sexuality and your gender identity, to the world. You can express your, through clothing, which of course doesn't have a gender, but is often gendered. I'm wearing a shirt, which you may think is a typically kind of male thing to wear. And so I'm expressing my gender identity. My gender expression is aligning with my gender identity, right? So when we talk about LGBT identities, it's important to be mindful that sometimes someone's gender identity may not, be expressed in a way that you expect, and so it may be, something that you have to navigate with them. And so, yeah, when thinking about LGBT identities, gender identity, attraction, biological sex, and expression are the 4 ways that we can think about it. And I suppose that the next thing to say is that navigating this conversation around gender inclusive language, around gender identities, around LGBT plus identities is not always an easy thing to do. It's not always simple. I would say that no one's identity is simple. There are so many facets of who we are, and LGBT people are no different. And so from a gender point of view, you can be cisgender, you can be genderqueer, you can be feminine, masculine, etc. And so, when we talk about these identities, and we have to be mindful that the conversation is not necessarily always easy. Appreciate that many of you are dialing in from around the world today, and we will talk a little bit about non-business English later, but in languages where gendered pronouns are present, it can be useful to include these in your email signature or your bio, because this signals to someone that may have a gender identity that is not the same as you may think. It can give them space to have that conversation around pronouns, around their gender identity with you. And we'll talk a little bit about allyship later. Marine mentioned allyship, which is really important during Pride. And one of the things that is easy to do, but very impactful, is this idea of trying to create more safe spaces to speak for trans people, for non-binary people. And one way to do this is to signal to them that you are able to have that conversation around pronouns and gendered language and identities. So just a short introduction on the kind of, acknowledging that the LGBT identities are complex, all identities are complex, and that the language that we use well, at least in business English, is sometimes not intuitive, sometimes not always clear, and that is okay. During Pride, it is okay to make mistakes. Actually, it's okay to make mistakes all year round. Just like Pride is not just for Pride, mistakes are not just for Pride either. But the key thing here is that you are willing to make those mistakes, you're willing to learn, and that you want to improve how you engage with LGBT people around you. But yeah, so that's kind of by way of introduction. Matt, is there anything you wanted to add here just around identities and navigating that before we move on to a quick poll to keep everyone to wake everyone back up?
Excellent. Yeah, I think the key point, Alex, and the one that really resonates with me strongly is this point around making mistakes. When we're talking about LGBT plus identities, and I think a key point to get across today is that LGBT language and terminology is very complex, and it's constantly evolving as well. So therefore, we are very likely, when we are having conversations, particularly about gender identity, which we tend to know in society less about, those mistakes are very likely to happen. And as long as those mistakes come from a really well-intended place, and we apologise and we learn from that experience, actually mistake making can be a key part of that learning process. So please don't worry about making mistakes when it does come to LGBT plus language. And I think we'll be really good at, let's run the poll if we can. Let's see what people are thinking today.
So I suppose the segue is Happy Pride, everyone. And, it's Pride Month. And, today we're talking a little bit about APAC and the region. And I was just wondering, when we think about the origin of Pride, we often, in a kind of Euro-American centric perspective, which unfortunately many of us do rely on too much. We think about Stonewall, right? We think about this political activist moment in the late 60s in the US that catalyzed a conversation around LGBT people in a kind of a bigger platform. But I wanted to get a sense of, in Southeast Asia, the first Pride was actually held in 1994. And I wanted to get, I wonder if anyone knew where that was held. So I'll launch this poll. So the first Pride in Southeast Asia was held in 1994, but where? Manila, Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, or Jakarta?
Great, we've got a lot of answers coming through, which is brilliant. So highly engaged group today, so thank you everybody. Okay, Alex, we've got about 40% people have now voted, so keep those votes coming in. So the first Pride in Southeast Asia was held in 1994, but where? Was it Manila, Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, or Jakarta? A few more votes to come in. We've got around 54% of you that have now voted, so please do cast your votes. It's interesting, Alex, the answers are actually changing, so yeah, give it a few more seconds. Brilliant. We've got a point coming through just on the chat function while you're voting there, worth just I think sort of affirming that. But sharing gender pronouns in your email signature on your LinkedIn profile, your badge during the conference, is a really powerful way to signal your support to the LGBT community, both internally and externally. So a really good point there from Marine at AGI. And I know that Allianz Global Investors have been doing a lot of work around pronouns, but they are a brilliant way to normalize conversations about gender identity. And then back to the poll. Let's see what people are saying, Alex.
So we overwhelmingly Bangkok came out top there, and I can see why. Because Bangkok is a place that does resonate with a lot of LGBT people, and we're talking about Thailand this morning, and you know, we're delighted to see that Thailand has recently drafted that legislation that will enshrine same-sex marriage, you know, in law. But actually, it was Manila that had the first Pride in Asia, which I think, you know, sends an interesting message there, that, you know, Manila is a place that continues to be you know, one of the most progressive in the region for LGBT plus people, and maybe come as a bit of surprise to some people. But you know, I think what we can see absolutely is the you know, the disparity around the world across regions in terms of how mature LGBT plus protections and safeguards are. But it's really encouraging to see the you know, the amount of Pride marches that are happening across the APAC region, and the number of first Prides that have been happening over the last sort of 10 years. And so I think overwhelmingly I can see a lot of interesting and very positive changes. I'd be really interested, I'm sure many of you are dialing in from around the region today, and please feel free to share with us, you know, what does Pride mean to you where you are, and what is the state of the Pride movement, if you want to call it that, where you are. I'd love to hear a bit more about this, because obviously, unfortunately, I'm based in, well, actually it's quite blue skies in London today, but normally I would say I'm based in kind of grey London, so I don't get a sense of that. But would love to hear a bit more about, you know, what it is that you are seeing. So yeah, so Manila, the first Pride in 1994, things you didn't know. I wanted to reflect very briefly on Stonewall as the first Pride movement, you know, globally, and I won't go into too much detail on this today, but if people are interested, then please drop a note in the chat and I maybe can cover it towards the end. But the point I want to make here is that Pride remains at its core a political statement. It's a moment of activism, and it is a call to action for those not part of the LGBT community, lawmakers, governments, to address the inequalities that are being faced, you know, and the oppression that is being faced by members of the LGBT plus community. In the US, Stonewall was a moment of violent confrontation between police and LGBT people in a bar in New York City. And this had followed a string of you know, confrontations between police and LGBT people throughout the 50s and early 60s. And the catalyst really was this need for conversation around the fact that LGBT people existed. When we think of Pride, actually the word Pride used to describe, you know, marches and demonstrations to raise awareness and call to action around LGBT people is used because before Stonewall and before the conversation really got started, you were not supposed to be proud to be part of the LGBT plus community. And so I think that still resonates with me now, that Pride is about being proud of your identity. It's about being proud of the community you're part of. It's being proud of that collective memory, of that collective experience of LGBT people around you. And it's about calling out the injustice that you see. So I think, you know, as we reflect on Pride around the world and Pride throughout the region, I think, you know, remembering that the Stonewall movement was based on a call to action, I think is still relevant and still very much important. One thing I would also say in doing some of the research that I've been doing for these sessions is just how recent subsequent you know, safeguards and protections have been, even in the US. You know, I don't want to use it in those terms, but often, you know, the US would like to be seen as the leader of the free world in terms of its, you know, LGBT rights and protections, but actually enshrining some of those protections has only happened very recently. And so even there, the conversation is still not fully formed and not fully matured. So one thing we should acknowledge is that every piece of progress is great. Matt, is there anything you wanted to add just on that early history of the Pride movement in the US before we look into the APAC region in a bit more detail?
Yeah, I think the key point there is that, you know, while Stonewall was absolutely, you know, a catalyst for the development of the LGBT rights movement, LGBT plus people, of course, have existed for as long as people have existed.
Yeah.
So we do have to look, deeper into our shared sort of LGBT histories, and really sort of think about that. But I think it's definitely pertinent to think about actually what were the pressure points that led to the Stonewall Rising. And we know, Alex, what was playing out at the time was high levels of discrimination, persecution, actually entrapment of the LGBT community as well by many parts of the authorities, including the police. And really, Stonewall was a moment in time where the community stood up, and actually there was a number of local businesses in the area of the Stonewall in New York, allies that stood up to advocate for the rights for LGBT plus people to exist. And of course, we saw that play out a few years ago as well in terms of another social, injustice movement as well, with the Black Lives Matter movement as well. And this touched, a lot of people's hearts very deeply. But we know what we are seeing at the moment, if we think about how does this apply to modern day, and Black Lives Matter was only, 2 years ago. But what we are seeing now is this sort of backlash against LGBT protections, legislation globally, high levels of persecution, anti-LGBT far-right political movements, governments worldwide that are, going against LGBT equality. So I do sort of, think within the next few years, there is going to come this point where actually, again, there's going to be a big rise in LGBT sentiment globally, and I do think we are going to see at some point another big movement, which I hope as well will be another catalyst to driving LGBT equality as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matt. And I think, you hit the nail on the head there. It's about calling out injustice and acknowledging that discrimination exists, but then leveraging that for positive action and positive change. Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so let's have a quick look now at APAC, which is why some of us are here today. And thank you again to everyone who's dialing in from the region. As I mentioned earlier, we'd love to hear a bit more about, if you've attended any of these Pride celebrations, or if you have any perspectives on here. I mean, maybe I'll call out Thailand firstly, given the news today that same-sex marriage is going to be explored, and has been, the draft legislation has been approved already. So we are hoping to see some really exciting changes happening, and only announced 4 days ago, but exciting to see watch this space. And Thailand, 1999, the Pride March was the first one, and then in this year, we've actually had the first Pride March in Thailand in 16 years. So that was very exciting, and I know that my Thai friends were very, very excited to see their families going to that Pride marches. So that was very exciting. And as we mentioned earlier, the Philippines, it was, the Philippines and Thailand among the most progressive in the Southeast Asia part of the region. And I think we can all appreciate, the early 90s was not necessarily the easiest time for LGBT people. And so, the progression here is really something. Where should we go next? I suppose, thinking about the evolution of Pride and the increase in, as Matt said, the increase in discrimination and the increasing, I suppose, some of the erosion of those protections and rights for LGBT people, comes to China. And in 2020, we actually saw a crackdown by police on Pride celebrations, resulting in many of the Pride celebrations throughout mainland China being cancelled in 2020. And, I think with some of the recent political, I don't want to get too political, but with some of the recent political developments in China and the strength of Xi Jinping's government, I think that the fact that the LGBT protections have kind of gone backwards a little bit is somewhat concerning. And I suppose, as Matt, tolerance, empathy, some of these things, this Pride are things that we need to think about. And as organizations, we have a responsibility to ensuring that the spaces that we are in control of are safe and for LGBT people. And one of the, Matt, maybe I'll come to you just on this question around how do global organizations that may have a presence in more progressive and less progressive places around the world in terms of LGBT legislation, how do they navigate this disparity and this disconnect between how their employees on the ground can express themselves versus providing safe spaces at work? What are your thoughts just on that global aspect of organizations?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And I think what I tend to see from the organisations, the members that we work with, in that in those countries where there's still a lot of challenge around the acceptance of LGBT equality and identities, all those countries that actually still have LGBT or being LGBT criminalised. A lot of organisations tend to quite simply do nothing in those spaces for fear of risk. Or potential welfare issues around their employees. And I think it's very difficult to navigate. And I think my first point on this is that a one-size-fits-all approach to LGBT inclusion or to any DE&I strategy simply can't work. Regional leaders and regional offices need to have a responsibility for driving their own DE&I strategies. I think that it can have a global operating model, but actually the way that we deliver that, I think we need to be incredibly sort of sensitive about. And I think also we need to get locals involved in the conversation. So it's not just white faces from the Western world that are talking about these things. We need to hear what it's like really on the ground. But one thing I would say, Alex, and just a final point here, is that we often talk about this point around creating psychological safety. And sometimes we don't necessarily need to be, in a particular sort of diversity group or a network or part of the community, but actually just by seeing your organizational signal, actually, we're having this pride conversation today. I know I'm based in X country where it is criminal. I'm not out, and that's my choice. But actually, just by seeing that beacon from the organization, from leadership, can actually send a very powerful signal and really genuinely make a difference to that person. So I think there's a variety. There's like two phases to this. One is around what are we doing as an organization overall, and actually how are we really approaching this with sensitivity in different regions and different offices. So I think that'll be my answer.
Thank you, Matt. No, and I think this idea of signaling is really important, and we talked a little bit about pronouns earlier, and some of the other signals. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of these signals. I feel like a bit of a broken record, but I always talk about this. If you see a sticker on the back of a car as you're driving that is part of a cause that you identify with, a political party you support, or even just the rainbow flag, what that does is immediately sends a signal that the people in that car are people that I could talk to about this topic. And when that is something that relates to your identity, that's really powerful. And so if you have those small signals at work, even if they're very subtle, like putting your pronouns in your bio, then it could be that if someone who's transgender at work in a place where it is not, there are no protections, or much fewer protections, then creating this safe space for conversation can be really, really, really important. And I wanted to talk now a little bit about one of the ways in which we can signal this to colleagues around the world, and this is in some of the language that we use. And I know that we're speaking in business English today, but I wanted to just reflect briefly on the fact that business English is not used everywhere, and we'll be transacting with, we'll be partnering with our clients, investors, maybe first, second, third language is English. So in many cases, using language that is supportive of the LGBT plus community, that's sensitive to the spectrum of gender, can be a really powerful and simple signal of an inclusive space. And when we think of business English, one easy example is, instead of saying ladies and gentlemen, you can say everyone, and all that does is give space for someone who doesn't identify as being a man or a woman. Non-binary people exist as well. And I wanted to just show a couple of ways in which around the world that this is being navigated. Japan is an interesting an interesting case. I'm sure many of you are familiar in that there is already an embedded spectrum of gender, even when talking about personal pronouns. So when you say my name is Alex, you know, I could use watashi, you know, to be impersonal or the kind of gender neutral. I could also use ore in the hypermasculine or atashi in the hyperfeminine. And so if you're a trans person at work, you know, the way that you navigate some of this will probably be quite challenging. You know, if you have to shift how you use these pronouns, then, you know, you have to come out every single time you use a word that includes the personal pronoun I. This is the same in something like Italian, where in the past tense, you have to signal gender in the way that you construct the verb forms. And so, you know, I have trans friends in Italy who had to come out every time they said something in the past tense. And just, you know, when we talk about psychological safety, having to do that is a point of stress every single time. I'm sure many of you will have heard of this idea of code switching, where you switch into different forms of language depending on where you are, who you're speaking with, and having to switch, you know, into pro-trans codes versus codes that are, you know, hiding the fact that you may be transgender or non-binary is a real point of stress. And so having these mechanisms to have more inclusive gendered language at work, and using this, actively exploring what does this mean in your own language and how can you bring this to work, can be a really powerful moment of allyship. And, you know, the introduction of the gender neutral pronouns and characters in Chinese as well, for example, which is very, very interesting. Okay, great. So I'm conscious that I've been talking a lot, so I'll move on to when we're talking about LGBT language. You know, how can we make this more inclusive a conversation, and how can we create some of these spaces and positive signals? I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I wanted to share with you a few thoughts from my side around what we can actually do as organizations to to create more inclusive LGBT plus environments linguistically. The first is, you know, consciously trying to create spaces to have conversations, and instead of filling those yourself, then, you know, hand over to someone else to fill that conversation. If there's a non-binary person on your team, for example, and you're not sure what it means to be non-binary, or why you might use they them pronouns or gender neutral pronouns or gender neutral language in general, then ask them. You know, creating safe spaces doesn't have to be a big challenge. It can be as little as asking a single question. As I mentioned, you know, explore gender inclusive terminology. I'm not saying that we have to go away from grammatical gender, because it is something that we can't necessarily get away from. It's so ingrained in how we speak, in our patterns of speech. But you know, exploring additional ways that you can involve, you know, exploring some of the things on the previous slide around gender inclusive markers or gender inclusive characters in Chinese, for example. The third thing is around this normalization of that conversation around pronouns and gendered language. So as well as using gender inclusive terminology, you know, try and have that conversation around what does this mean in the languages that I'm speaking and I'm surrounded by. Person centering is something that is often talked about as well, around you know, centering someone as someone who is something rather than just defining them by the fact that they might be gay. And then finally is around igniting conversations. So if you see something that isn't right, a microaggression or something, then you know, have that conversation with that person. Call in the conversation. And finally, just acknowledge that mistakes will happen. You'll make mistakes, and that's okay. As long as you acknowledge them, you apologize and correct yourself. And then there's this three-step of educating yourself to make sure it doesn't happen again, and crucially following through. So if you make a mistake around someone's gender identity, then that's okay. You know, it may hurt them in the moment, but acknowledge it, and crucially try and follow through. So just a few thoughts from my side on what can we actually do to you know, improve some of that linguistic safe space for LGBT plus people. And before we move on to the panel discussion, maybe if I can just summarize, you know, a little bit of the conversation today. We're talking about why pride is important, and I, at the beginning of this presentation, talked about Stonewall and some of the amazing developments across the APAC region. But I think in summary, Pride is all of the things on the screen here, as in addition to the advocacy, which obviously is so critical to the core of Pride. A celebration, action, acknowledgement, an opportunity for conversation, a reminder of the importance of intersectional conversations, which is a term I haven't quite covered, but is essentially that LGBT people, that's not the only aspect of your identity, right? Your race, ability, age, all of these things intersect with each other, and so that that there are Venn diagrams, if you will, and the points of intersection are opportunities for additional discrimination, but they're also opportunities for celebration. So having these conversations around some of these aspects is a real opportunity to create more psychologically safe spaces. And finally, I would just say it's a platform for education, which is what we're trying to do today, which is to have a space for conversation. And I think this Pride, if there's one thing you can do, it's to have more conversations with the people around you. But Matt, any final words from your side before we jump into the discussion with the team from Allianz?
Nothing from me. I think it'd be great to hear from some of the panelists now, around what Pride means to them. So over to you, Alex, to facilitate the conversation.
Fabulous. Well, thank you everyone for listening to me, to my waffle for the last half an hour. But great, I'd love to come to maybe Daniel, if I could come to you first, just to get a sense of what does Pride mean to you?
Okay, let me unmute. And hi everyone. A big thank you for dialing in. Well, first of all, to me, Pride is something incredibly positive, right? It's a word which really shows you want to go out. You're not ashamed, right? It's something you are very eager to share. And looking at the timeline that Alex has shared, it's quite remarkable that it actually started more than 100 years ago. And I think we can all not imagine the bravery that these folks had to bring up, so that we are able to celebrate as we can today. So for me as an ally, it means predominantly to show my support to the LGBT plus community and also encourage everyone around me to do the same. So probably a little anecdote is when I grew up, obviously for me, LGBT plus was actually not a thing, if I may say so, because it was just not important for me how I communicate with other colleagues. So I would say a very passive supporter for this topic. So it really has changed when I came to Asia. I used to live for more than 5 years in Hong Kong, actually. And one event which I shared with some of probably the participants here already is that I had a look from my office to the HSBC building, and in front of the HSBC building there were two lion statues, right? I think Steph and Stit, very iconic ones. And one day they were covered in rainbow color, and I looked outside the window. I thought, well, that's really beautiful, right? I really like it. But then the other day, I saw that this created an outrage, and there were clients really being very angry. There were expressions. I looked it up actually again, because it's still in the internet, obviously, internet. So it was quoted as being disgusting and trampling and threatening family values. And another expression was that the rainbow color would deprive all the strength and stamina of the original lions. And I read it, and I remember I was really shocked, because I could just not imagine how a rainbow color would threaten anyone. And that was a moment where I realized that I cannot assume that everyone is kind of tolerant and open. And I realized that it's a responsibility for myself and also for our company to be really vocal and upfront about this topic, and that a silent allyship is actually not enough. And that was a time where then obviously my ways also crossed with Marine, and where we started the LGBT plus Pride work stream, where I got in contact with so many wonderful people who really shared a very strong purpose around being active in this area. And that's maybe a good occasion to move over to Zero or Tim because they've been founding members of the Pride movement here in AGI as well.
Yeah, great. Zira, if we could come to you just for some thoughts from your side, if that's okay, on what Pride means to you. And
Sure. Happy Pride, everyone. To me, Pride, it's an opportunity for everyone, not only restricted to LGBT plus community, to come together and then to celebrate our inclusion in the communities, and also to celebrate our differences. We should respect the choices others made, be it their lifestyle, our culture, or who we love. Also, Pride, it's also empowerment to me, means empowerment to me. There are challenges and struggles, as Daniel mentioned, right? Painting rainbows on the lions, faced by LGBT plus community. And Pride is very visible and powerful response to those challenges and struggles. Maybe I can also share a story that about when I joined the Taipei Pride Parade years ago, okay? Okay, so I was like dancing and doing crazy things, marching down the street on the parade. And then I saw a middle-aged lady walking along near me. And because of the magic power of Pride, right? Everyone is so friendly and you don't afraid to approach anyone. So I start talking to her. And then she told me she's actually coming from mainland China. She visited Taipei just for the parade because her son just came out to her recently. She is very worried and helpless because she don't know what she can do to help him. She knows so little about LGBT, and then she's just very concerned about his happiness. But seeing, the great number of attendees for the Taipei Pride, we are all having fun and being very proud. It provided her a totally different perspective. A few years later, I met the same mom in the Hong Kong Pride Parade, but this time she's not alone. She actually formed an organization for the parents of LGBT kids in mainland China, and she's leading the gang to join the Hong Kong Pride. So I can still remember, her big smiley face comparing to the very concerned face when I saw her first time in Taipei, and then holding a rainbow flag and then standing very proudly in the crowd. So I think she's, her story is actually a very powerful tool to a proof to all of us that we should keep spreading the rainbow power and love as well.
Spreading the rainbow power, I love that. I want that on a t-shirt. But it's amazing how, an ordinary person can make such a difference. And there's no you don't have to be part of the LGBT plus community. The power of allyship is so critical. Tim, can I come to you just for some thoughts from your side as well?
Yeah, sure. And thanks to everybody for dialing in. And I love your energy, Sarah. Happy Pride to everybody dialing in. Maybe to add on what's been said before, for me, Pride means three things essentially. It's a demonstration, it's a commemoration, and it's a celebration. And thanks, Alex and Matt, for the introduction and the information that you shared with us. Right, when we think about what we are trying to achieve, it's essentially political equity in so many areas, and we don't have it yet in the world. This is why it really is at its core something political for all of us. And I love what Tydrun put in the chat earlier. Right, it's about, we are all different in some ways, and that makes us equal. Right, we're from different countries, we have different sexual identities, different genders, whatever, right? You can really expand it, and that diversity in essence also makes us equal. So for me, it's also demonstration of and for acceptance and for respect. I also think it's a month for me, Pride Month, to commemorate what has been achieved so far, but also to remember that we can't forget to continue to fight and strive for achieving this goal. And if I look at, for example, what's happening in Florida with the Don't Say Gay bill, right? In some ways, you feel like you're moving a step back, which makes it so important for us to still continue in the spirit and remember all those amazing people, especially when you think about it from a white man's perspective. It's been mostly also in Stonewall, right? It was Black trans women who have been really holding up the flag and stood there, their woman against the police, I should say. But also it's a celebration, right? To celebrate how far we've come, and at the end of the day, to really celebrate who we are as individuals and as a team, as groups.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Yeah, no, I can completely agree. I mean, when we think about, I'm conscious of, being, I don't want to be that, we talk about, I'm not going to talk about colonialism, but, the white voice, the white savior complex and all of this stuff. And it is important to acknowledge. And, the fact that we're trying to spotlight people of color and the diversity that exists within the LGBT community is so important, during Pride. Zero, from your perspective, when we think about, that amazing story on allyship, from your side, what is it that you want to see from allies during Pride? How can allies support?
Well, I think one important key thing about ally, it's we have to, ally is not someone that, okay, I'm going to help you, I'm going to save you. Being an ally, it's also benefit ourselves. It's mutual, I think, especially in a workplace. Like I think as mentioned earlier, right? We are all equal because we are all different, and we are minority of some sorts. So say when I was a kid, right, I dare not to tell my girlfriends that actually I don't like their Barbie dolls, but they're peer pressure. They're okay, let's play together. But say if we can widen our imaginations and then with respect the difference in others, I think we can actually create a better place for everyone to live and to work. And also for allyship and pride, right? So don't worry about too much, I know so little about the topic, or I'm so not strong enough to stand for others. I honestly believe that, everyone can make a difference to other people. And the earlier you take the step, even if it's a baby step, the more can benefit.
Every baby step is important, right? Every marginal gain is really important. I'd be interested to hear a little bit about the network and kind of organizationally, if that's okay. What have you found in launching a Pride network in the APAC region, and what is it? What are some of your learnings that you'd like to share with people today, if that's okay to cover?
First of all, it's difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, Daniel and I asked me to join. I'm so happy that we can join the task force, or the LGBT task force in day one. And so far, I think I'm still the only member from APAC to join it from the firm. So please, if colleagues and friends, please, if you want to, be part of it, and then we can have fun together, and then, to share the rainbow's power. So please come and join with us. And I think, right, say, in when we're promoting or when we start the networking, right, I always believe that it would be very odd if we deliberately brought up the conversation every time. Let's talk about LGBT in every conversation, and then be like, I have to stay politically correct all the time. But it will be the change cannot be, things cannot be changed overnight. But if we, set up the right acoustic, then we can foster the right conversation, and then we can move on. Say, one key message: joining the task force doesn't mean that you are gay or you're lesbian. Okay, so that always have some some of our colleagues or some of the members still, when I first invited them to join, they will have this misunderstanding. You can be an ally as well, which is very important to the LGBT plus community. So please join us, and then we are all friendly and very beautiful people. So come and join, be part of us.
Yeah, I know that. Thank you. I think you raise a really wonderful point in that, if anyone was on the call wondering, I'm not part of the LGBT community, there's not much that I can do. Actually, there is a lot that you can do. If your organization has a diversity network, a pride network, get involved. And it doesn't mean that you have to be part of the LGBT community, but that every opportunity for conversation is an important one, right? Tim, just from your side, what are your thoughts on just the networks and the roles that we have in as allies in organizations? If anyone was unsure, just to add to what Zero was saying.
No, absolutely. That's a really good point, right? Ally, you don't have to be, or also the gay people, lesbian people, bi people, trans people can be allies, and that's important. And I think this is also one of the things, and I can speak from my own experience, why I decided to join the network. because I felt it was important to be visible, right? I mean, that's just something that why I think it's so important that Zero is holding up the flag in AP, why it is important that people are showing their faces. I have it too, because it really matters, right? So when I think back of when I joined Allianz, which is maybe now 14, 15 years ago, I was very unsure with how open I can be at work, right? Let me put it this way, coming out is a journey that never ends, right? So every day in every situation, and you gave some good examples, Alex, how also language is forcing us to do that or to think about it. You're constantly evaluating, is it okay now if I'm being myself? Do I have to mask it? And then there are all these needle pins sometimes that you're getting, right? So somebody makes a joke, meant funny, but it's actually homophobic. If the person knew that you're a gay or lesbian or trans or bi, I probably wouldn't make this joke. It's about, right? So you know that sometimes you call something gay in like kids in school and they mean something negative with it. Also, those are all small needle pins where on the contrary, if you think about how can you be an ally? And again, it's not about being a savior. It's about showing and signaling that you're completely accepting of every identity that there is. So small little things that I can also share from my experience. It's seeing a little rainbow sticker on somebody's desk or computer can send the signal, right? It's an invitation, but it's an invitation that somebody then can choose to accept. And sometimes it takes a long time for people to really feel comfortable with who they are and share it. So I think we as an organization then, and people in the organization really have a duty to signal that and to be those allies. It's also some small things. If I remember, sometimes if people told me, oh, they had dinner last night with one of their friends and her wife, right? It sends a signal that, yeah, they are completely comfortable with LGBT plus people. So there's so many things. And as always in life, it's the sum of the little things that really make the difference. And coming back to your original question, Alex, I think it's both everybody in the organization that hopefully after this call is an ally or already is. But I think it also means that the people in the community need to be allies for each other.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, no, I completely agree that the power of the tiny gain is really critical, and everyone could be an ally. And you raised a great point there that allies are not just for people who are not part of the LGBT plus community. It's really important that members of the community, trans people, for example, non-binary people who, typically are disproportionately likely to experience discrimination and to, experience mental health challenges and conditions, that we should demonstrate effective and authentic allyship for them as well, and create spaces where they are able to speak just as much as, white gay people can speak as well. I'm conscious of time, and we're coming close to the hour, but so I'll just, would anyone like to say anything? Zero, can I just come to you maybe for a couple of final words before we hand back to Maureen for the closing statements?
Well, okay, well, I think to be an ally or, to be supportive you don't have to be someone really smart or, really super. Everyone can be part of it and can help each other, especially, in the workplace, in the current environment that we are living in. Every small forces count, and then, so just stay positive, and then rainbow powers will keep on rolling.
Rainbow powers keep on rolling. Another excellent t-shirt idea. Love that. Okay. Thank you very much. I think I completely agree that allyship shouldn't be something that's difficult. It shouldn't be something that's complicated. It should be something that everyone can do all the time. It should be a commitment to positive action. And just the small gestures, small signals send a really powerful message. I think we're kind of coming up to time, but Maureen, I'd just like to come back to you if you don't mind, just for any final reflections from your side or any closing thoughts.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks to everyone. I mean, I don't know how the group is feeling, but personally, I mean, I found this session, like yesterday's one, very energizing. So I'm sure it's going to be a really good day. I mean, I really like, what you said, Zero. I will, keep this somewhere on my mind, but it's really about, spreading the rainbow power. I think you said it very well, and we need to do something with this quote, Zero. I think that, you mentioned also something very important about allyship, but especially active allyship. So that's going to be really my takeaway for today. I think that's what, why Pride and Pride Month and all those, key LGBT plus milestones are so important as well. It's because it's remind us that, just simply being, a passive ally is not enough. You need to be intentional. You need to do this with, you need to be conscious about your allyship, and you need to show it. Otherwise, you're really missing all, all the power, and you're not spreading the rainbow power. So yeah, that's really my takeaway for today. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, Maureen. Yeah, spread that rainbow power. Happy Pride, everyone. I think we'll close the session now, but I'd just like to extend a huge thank you to everyone for joining, and to the amazing panelists for sharing your thoughts and personal reflections. It's really, these conversations are so important, and I find them really energizing, as you said. So I'm looking forward to a great rainbow Pride-filled day. But thank you everyone for joining, and if you do have any questions or want to share any personal reflections or thoughts, then please do feel free to reach out to Matt and myself on the LGBT Great side, and I'm sure the team at Allianz would agree that reach out to them as well. And yeah, wishing you all a really happy Pride. This session will be made available on LGBT Great's YouTube site, so keep an eye out for that. And then look forward to the next conversation. And happy Pride, everyone.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Thank you.
Have a nice day, nice evening.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Tunisia. Bye-bye.